Hi guys, in today's lesson we're going to summarize world music general. So remember that this is world music general because there is world music focus, which is our Arabic music for 2020. So we'll begin with our African music and Arabic music. In this section, you are required to recognize the sound of the following specific instruments. So the first one is the Rabab, then the kora, the xylophone, or also known as the marimba, and then finally the oud. So apart from knowing the specific instruments in terms of their sounds, you should also be familiar with the following general characteristics of music from this part of the world. So the first thing, or the first general characteristic that you need to know is syncopation. Syncopation is the accenting of a note which would usually not be accented. Syncopation is often described as being offbeat. The time signature of a piece of music gives an indication of a regular pattern of strong and weak beats. A syncopated rhythm goes against this pattern by putting the accent on weak beats. The second characteristic that you need to know is polyrhythm. Polyrhythm is a situation where you have different rhythms being played at the same time. This is very typical in African drumming. Then the third thing that you need to know is ostinato. We know that an ostinato is a continually repeated musical phrase or rhythm. We all know that in African music there is a lot of call and response. So this is another characteristic that you need to know in this section. We also have parallel harmony. Okay, this only applies to African music. Essentially, parallel harmony is the parallel movement of two or more melodic lines that preserves a consistent interval. Then the last thing that you need to know in this section is heterophony, and this only applies to Arabic music. So we know that heterophony is a type of texture characterized by the simultaneous variation of a single melodic line. In the next section, we look at Latin American music. As a guide, exploring tango from Argentina, music for panpipes, that's from the Andes, and the mariachi from Mexico will introduce many of the characteristic features of Latin American in general. In this section, you should learn to recognize the sound of the following specific instruments: bandoneon, panpipes, charago, and the guitar. You should also be familiar with the following general characteristics of music from this part of the world. You need to know syncopation and homophonic texture. In the next section, we're looking at Chinese music. So in this section, you need to learn how to recognize the sounds of the following specific instruments: the chi-in, the dz, and the erhu. Apart from knowing the above mentioned instruments, you also need to know the following general characteristics of music from this part of the world. You need to know what a pentatonic scale is. So in a nutshell, pentatonic scale is a scale which is made up of 5 notes. And most of music from Asia is made up of the pentatonic scale. The next thing that you need to know is pitch bending. And the last general characteristic in this section is ornamentation. The next section looks at Indian music. In Indian music, you need to recognize the sound of the following specific instruments. The first one is the Bansuri. The second one is the sitar. The third one is the sarangi. And the fourth one is the tabla. So remember, you won't be asked questions on the way the instruments are played, but the most important thing is to be able to recognize their sounds. Apart from the instruments, you should also be familiar with the following general characteristics of music from this part of the world. You need to know the texture in Indian music, which is melody and drone. Then the next thing is pitch bending, which is very common in Indian music. And the last thing is ornaments. In the next section, we're looking at Indonesian music. In this section, you need to recognize the sound of the main Indonesian ensemble, the gamelan. You should be familiar with the following general characteristic of music from this part of the world. One, and of course being the only characteristic, that's homophonic texture, which has already been described in the section on African and Arabic music. In the last section, we look at Japanese music. In Japanese music, you need to recognize the sound of the following instruments: the shakuhachi, the koto, and the sho. You should also be familiar with the following general characteristic of music from this part of the world, which is heterophonic texture. In conclusion, this is what you are required to know in world music general. Thank you.